This childhood death game where you'd get shot by people in red jumpsuits has got a way darker backstory than you think. What started as a one-time thrill for a bunch of rich Koreans in 1988 became a full-blown worldwide death tournament, being held every year in many different countries, thousands of players, and even more deaths, all because one psycho thought, why not make people fight to the death playing rock, paper, scissors? And so, Squid Game was born. Today we will be looking into the complete timeline of the Squid Game, from how it all started to becoming the Netflix and chill for billionaires alike. Take that, escape room! Everything began with this man named Oh Il-nam. As a kid, he liked to play childhood games on the street with his friends. They would play games such as marbles, red light, green light, and tug of war, the staple games that made up the first season of Squid Game. He lived in a neighborhood in Sangmun-dong, where many ordinary people lived in Seoul back in the early 1970s. So this suggests that despite his wealth, he eventually grew up on a normal household. We know of this because according to him from the previous season during the marbles game, he's said to have lived in a similar area when he was young. Eventually, he and his friends would play on the streets until they get tired and bored of it, a foreshadowing for what was to come in the future. Later on in his 30s, he got married and had a son just like everyone else. Then he decided he wanted to become an entrepreneur and start his own business. And as luck would have it, South Korea was going through an economic boom from the early 1960s to the 1990s. This is known as the Miracle on the Han River or the Korean Miracle. This is the time where South Korea went from an underdeveloped country to a fully developed nation. But since this is not an educational documentary about South Korea's economic growth, I'll just put it plain and simple. Il-nam's timed his business correctly and it catapulted into the skies alongside the booming economy. It made him rich and wealthy beyond anyone could imagine. Oh Il-nam became a billionaire. So he bought expensive land and properties across the country. Let's say he also bought private islands for future use. Let's put it that way. And spoiler alert, 7 episodes in and the detective is still yet to find it. Il-nam had everything in life. The luxury cars, the mansions, everything anyone could ever ask for. But he got bored with it. To him, life is no fun anymore. Despite having all the money in the world, he felt like all of it was bland. Quite something for a rich taste. So what does he do? He confined about his existential crisis with his rich buddies, only for him to find out that they're all feeling the same thing. So this collective group of billionaires came up with a genius plan to bring some thrill back into their lives. You'd think they would come up with ideas like going to space, building the largest skyscraper, or visiting the Titanic's wreckage with a submarine. But nope! Apparently, they all agreed that watching poor people suffer playing kids' games was the best they could come up with. And so Squid Game was born. With every one of his rich friends on board, he began the construction of the Squid Game Island. He made it so it would just look like an inhabited island from the outside, and he built the facilities within. The rooms were decorated to look all bright, friendly, and colorful. Even the staff members dressed up their part. Naturally, Il-nam appointed himself as the host of the games, and his rich friends, who most likely sponsored some of the operation cost, became the VIPs who watched the games from the sidelines. With everything set up, the first Squid Game kicked off in 1988. Funny enough, that was the same year South Korea hosted the Olympic Games. Talk about a big year for sports. One brought nations together, the other brought contestants to their knees. The way players are roped into these games is kind of genius in a messed up way. They specifically handpick people who are buried in deep debt because they are the desperate ones who will eventually risk their lives for a shot of a life-changing fortune. What's surprising is, Il-nam actually believed that he is doing a good thing for these unfortunate people. He believed that if they didn't join the games, They would have died out cold in the streets or got their organs sold by debt collectors instead. He believed that these games are a chance for players to redeem themselves and change their lives around. Doing so, everybody plays, the VIPs are happy, they fund the prize money and operations, and the game continues. Everyone wins! Well, not exactly, because here's the thing, only one person gets to walk away with the entire prize pool. If they choose to leave early, they get nothing, just like in the first season. And if the games do continue till the end, the chances of each person winning against 456 other players stands at 0.219%. That is excluding some factors such as old age, handicaps, and being unfamiliar with the games. Speaking of games, the games change every year so as not to bore the VIPs from watching the same thing over and over. I should also mention that the VIPs don't know what the next game would be before they start. This shows in the first episodes where they are asking the front man what the next game would be. Not knowing the next game you'd watch from a spectator's standpoint sounds exciting. But oh boy, it won't feel as good when you're the one playing. You see, back then, Squid Games was much more different than what we've seen. In 1988, it had a lot of things that needed improvement on. How do you pull off a secret death game and keep it under the radar of the authorities? Better yet, how do you find your ideal contestants and make sure the winner don't go blabbing about it on a TED Talk? The whole process of making something as grand as a Squid Game work takes time to perfect. Not to mention this game started decades ago when technology was basically 2 tin cans and a string. The only way this was possible was because you're running it for the elites. The 1% of the 1%. Nearly everyone involved in the games would have connections to the government or the police. Even a random fisherman could be a secret agent who is keeping the game island hidden. And as time goes on, the Squid Game only got better. Just like fine wine, but with blood. The game got more refined as each batch of players went on throughout the years. Motion detecting machine made the red light, green light game possible with a creepy doll. Soldiers were now divided into a strict hierarchy and scream, "I'm more important than you," just because they're a square. The island became a nearly impenetrable secret that cloaks itself from satellites. Not to mention, tracking players are easier than ever with trackers implanted to every contestant. And the games that were only enjoyed by a select group of Il-nam's friends were now accessible to more elites around South Korea and throughout the world. Apparently, Il-nam and his friends were not the only ones who were bored to death by having so much money. Rich people from everywhere else were also feeling the same thing. As if being filthy rich comes with a medical condition called terminal boredom, and as the philanthropist of psychopath billionaires, Il-nam felt sympathy to every single one of his kind across the globe. So he decided to expand the games worldwide. Squid Game became a secretive global franchise of death games that became available to many countries across the globe, each running their own local childhood death games. It became a secret entertainment channel only available to the wealthiest of the elites. Its franchise grew faster than McDonald's could say, "Big Mac." The game continued, and continued, with each year passing. It is until 27 years later when the next head of Squid Game unknowingly entered the picture as a broken-deaded player himself. After 27 years and a staggering 12,992 deaths on the original South Korean island, the 28th edition of Squid Game began. Among the 456 players invited this year was a desperate Wang In-ho, whose sole purpose is to win the prize money and save his sick wife. In-ho wasn't just like any other player in debt. All his life, he'd been an upright police officer with a near-perfect track record. He married a loving wife and is months away from welcoming their first child. But as things have been quite peacefully lately, His wife was suddenly diagnosed with liver cancer during pregnancy. The doctors has presented them with two options: to terminate the pregnancy and focus on her treatment, or to continue the pregnancy knowing it could cost her life. Even before stepping into the Squid Game arena, In-ho was already battling difficult battles. But you see, there is a third option for this. She could just have a liver transplant. The only problem is, it is very expensive and far from what a normal police officer could ever afford. And so desperate to save his wife, we all know what he needed to do to get the money. He borrowed from loan sharks. The only problem is the police caught him doing so and they interpreted it as bribery. So despite his clean record, he got fired on the spot, leaving him with an expensive surgery to pay for and no job to pay for the cost. Apparently, while walking down the subway stations, he also encountered the strange Squid Game salesman and got roped into a slapping game. With that, he got handed the card and was invited to play. Desperate for the money, he didn't hesitate to join, and thus the 28th annual Squid Games commenced. He played under the number 132, and as shown from the Squid Game record books, he eventually came out as the victor. What you didn't know about In-ho is that he is a man of focus, commitment, and sheer will. While we don't know the exact 6 games they played during that time, it's safe to assume that he has his fair share of childhood games in the past. With a ridiculous 45 billion won now in his hands, In-ho wasted no time and rushed back to the hospital to finally pay for his wife's surgery. Finally, she could now get the transplant she needed and deliver their baby safe and sound. With the grand total he won from the games, they could live comfortably for the rest of their lives without having to worry about money ever again. But what he didn't know is that he arrived a little too late. His wife had succumbed to her illness while he was fighting for the prize money. The very reason he entered the Squid Game for was gone, and this left him drowning in grief and despair. As he crippled with the devastating loss, the egoistic creator of Squid Game, Il-nam, approached him with an offer. Il-nam saw potential in him, a broken but capable man with no ties left to the outside world. With the host growing older and needing someone trustworthy to oversee and manage the games, he offered In-ho a place within the Squid Game organization. At first, In-ho hesitated to accept the offer, but with no family, no career, and no sense of purpose, he eventually accepted. And from that moment on, he began wearing the black mask and took on the role of the frontman. The once principled police officer, driven by love and desperation, had now become a key figure in the deadly world of the Squid Game. With everything set in motion, the annual Squid Games carried on like clockwork. Each year, 464 die and 1 person survives, and it is until the 33rd Squid Game where our first season begins. Here enters a smiling Song Gi-hoon, not knowing what he'd get himself into. But it was also the only year that the game's creator, Il-nam, would step away from being the host to entering the games himself as a player. Why would he do that, you ask? Well, he was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor and knew that his days were numbered. He wanted to experience a very different kind of thrill one last time and relive his childhood memories playing games. And so he became Player 001. It is also revealed at this point that the Squid Game operations were infiltrated by a bunch of organ harvesters. They intentionally keep the eliminated players alive so they can take their organs and sell it on the black market. It's not like they didn't know such operations existed within the organization. According to the frontman, he didn't care if they sell, eat, take, or do whatever with them as long as they don't interfere with the game's equality. As for Il-nam, well, the dude is growing old at this point, so he probably doesn't know anything about that. He ran the games for 33 years, and at this point he most likely would have offloaded every task to the front man already. But back to the games. By the end of the first season, after a series of very sad deaths, Gi-hoon remains the sole survivor and won all of the prize money to himself. Well, also, except for the old man Il-nam, who is revealed as the mastermind behind the games during his deathbed. What's surprising is that Ilnam actually believed these games were giving people a fair shot in life. If you can call dodgeball to death fair, then yeah. And this whole thing only started because he and his VIP buddies were bored out of their mind. Fast forward to Season 2, Brain Tumor finally did its thing. The frontman steps up to run the show. He kept most of the rule intact but added a small new feature, like every yearly iPhone release since 2014. Now players can vote to leave the game every round and take their fair cut of the prize money. Oh, and remember those organ thieves? Well, they managed to climb up the ranks, and even one of them became the second frontman. Cool uniform, I guess. When Gahoon, who is now lock and loaded, headed to the airplane to go the United States to finally reunite with his daughter and live happily ever after. He decided he doesn't want a happy, peaceful life. So he didn't board the plane and walked backwards like he did something cool there. He now wanted to take revenge against a billion-dollar organization. But spoiler alert, nothing he did ever gone right since then. Fail after fail after fail after fail. He got rid of the K-pop haircut and began sported a worse one. He started living in a 100-room hotel to hide his tracks, yet the Squid Game salesman still managed to find his one bedroom. He got a unique new invitation to Squid Game, and from here he's back as a player. And just like how Ilnam, the game's creator, entered the game, the frontman also joined this season of Squid Game as a player, even wearing the same number he did back then. But unlike Ilnam, who is about nostalgia and good vibes, the frontman entered the game to teach our idiot protagonist a very hard lesson. We all know what happened from there. Now, let's talk numbers. Over its 33-year run, the original Korean Squid Game alone has racked an estimated body count of about 16,704 people. And since the games went global, that number skyrockets to somewhere between 83,250 and 334,080 deaths. This is to say, not all islands were built at the same time, and newer ones popped up throughout the years. But hey, it's not a bad thing considering there have been 180 to 720 people who walked out as millionaires. But in reality, Squid Game really forces you to wrestle with your moral compass. Do you think it's okay to let broke people play gladiator for a chance at a good life? Or is it just rich people playing God because they're bored? As said by the mastermind himself, the rich and the poor actually have something in common. Life gets boring for both in the end. Honestly, if I ever had millions, I'd be too busy crossing out the 1,000 things I have on my bucket list. But if you ever find yourself inside Squid Game, watch this next video to learn how to beat every game and walk away with the prize money. No bloodshed required, I think.